and welcome to 7 Days in Europe. Today I'm delighted to welcome to the programme none other than the President of the European Parliament himself, Martin Schulz. President, welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much.
Well, there's a lot to talk about, of course, with 1 year ahead of the next elections. But before we do, let's get down to what we always have, the yes-no interlude, where I ask a series of questions to which I'd like you to answer just yes or no. In the 2009 elections, turnout fell to just 43%. Are you worried it could fall further?
No.
Are you disappointed that in Croatia the turnout was only about 21%?
Yes.
Is the EU budget that's left the MFF big enough to kickstart growth?
No.
Is there anything that can be done about that?
Yes.
Has the austerity of recent years soured popular opinion about the EU?
Yes.
And was the EU wrong to demand so much austerity?
Yes.
Is there a way to get growth going again now? Because there's not much money around.
Yes.
Were you surprised at the US spying allegations, bearing in mind we had Echelon in 2001?
No.
Don't all advanced countries actually engage in spying?
Yes.
There's lots of excitement at the time of the Arab uprisings. Did the EU respond well to that?
No.
Is it a safer world now than it was before or not?
No.
OK, well, our time is up for that part. Thank you very much. In a moment, we'll be looking ahead to some of the Parliament's September agenda. But first, you're on record as saying you're very concerned about what's happening in Egypt. What we're seeing there, I mean, the violence, obviously, against protesters, is this the result of a popular turning against Morsi, the president, or is it a military coup?
Difficult to judge. I think military coup is it without any doubt. The military took over power, and I think on the other hand it is a protest perhaps not against Morsi alone. It is a protest against a decrease of life conditions which were already worse and which are becoming worse every day. So I think ordinary citizens in the streets are protesting because they have no water, they have no jobs, their children have no perspectives, and this is for us, the Europeans, and for the United States of America, an appeal. What we did after the so-called Arab Spring was to send our foreign affairs ministers to the country honoring the revolution, and then they went back to their respective capitals and cut together with their finance ministers the aid. And this is the mistake we made. If we want that the revolution, a democratic development should win, we must support the reform forces in the country. In what way? I mean, what could we do that's different? It's not just money, obviously. Money, there's a sort of belief in the EU at times that money solves all the problems. It doesn't. No, but to invest. I'll give you an example. Cairo has 22 million inhabitants. And everybody who went to Cairo knows the water provided for 22 million city is a disaster. You can't even drink water, and citizens living there are not like tourists able to buy every day fresh water, or you have fresh water on your room in the hotel or whatever. There is a difference between our view when we are there as tourists and the reality of the life there. So to invest, for example, in water management, in water provide, to improve, this is a basic element of life. Do you feel that Morsi could have actually achieved that had he been given more time or not? No, I think Morsi had only one goal, to stabilize, to stabilize the own power, his individual power, and to transform the country into an Islamic country. OK, we'll be talking about that and many other things very shortly. But first of all, a look ahead to some of the Parliament's September issues with Caroline Grasso.
Faire le plein avec une nouvelle génération d'agrocarburants. L'idée fait son chemin dans l'Union. Produits à partir de sources végétales comme le colza, ces carburants pollueraient moins que les carburants classiques, mais modifient l'affectation des sols. Conséquence, et pas des moindres, ils font concurrence aux cultures vivrières et produisent des gaz à effet de serre. Les députés négocieront à la rentrée avec les États sur des biocarburants de 3e génération, produits à partir d'algues ou encore de déchets. Afin de ne pas répéter les erreurs du passé, les députés veulent obliger les fournisseurs de ces nouveaux carburants à plus de transparence. Une enquête sur les programmes de surveillance américains. Après la pause estivale, les députés de la Commission des libertés civiles reprendront leurs travaux suite aux allégations d'écoute des bâtiments de l'Union européenne et d'espionnage par les États-Unis. Ils devraient présenter leurs conclusions d'ici la fin de l'année. Objectif, protéger les personnes dénonçant ces abus et émettre des recommandations pour empêcher des cas similaires de se reproduire à l'avenir. Halte au surendettement pour acheter son logement. Ce sera l'un des grands dossiers de la première session plénière de septembre. Pour les eurodéputés, la spéculation sur le marché du logement était en grande partie responsable de l'effondrement du système bancaire. Le Parlement souhaite notamment renforcer la transparence au moment de contracter un emprunt. Un délai de rétractation de 14 jours figure aussi parmi les propositions.
So, President Martin Schulz, we've got another almost 12 months before the European elections. What do you see as the main challenges facing the Parliament in particular, but the EU as a whole?
The EU was a promise in previous times of peace, of social justice, of growth, of jobs. And peace, the promise is still kept, but growth, more jobs, more salaries, a more decent life for always increasing number of people, the promise is not kept. The idea of Europe is a promise that cooperation across borders between countries and nations lead to more stability. And visibly, it leads not to more stability. And this is the biggest problem, that we promise to people on one hand things, neither we as European institutions nor the institutions of the member states are sticking to. And this is the major problem of the view of citizens to the European Union.
What about the problems with Hungary, for instance? I mean, that is an ongoing problem with Mr. Orban's constitutional changes. How dangerous is that for the EU as a whole?
It is dangerous because we can't define common rules and then to allow to everybody not to respect the common rules. This is, by the way, not only a problem with Hungary and the constitutional questions. Look to the Stability Pact and the criteria. We define measures, we define lines, rules, frames, and then at the end people are not respecting. This is destroying trust.
Because Mr. Orban would argue, well, I have a majority, I can do what I like, more or less.
Yeah, in a community you can't do what you like. You must make always compromise. And the idea of the founding fathers and mothers of the European community was that we create a transnational frame in which we find a compromise saving the face for everybody. That means, on the other hand, everybody must make a compromise and not say alone, me and my majority allows me to do whatever I wish, and you have not to interfere in my domestic affairs. A member of the European Union has domestic affairs, but domestic affairs of a member of the European Union are also affecting all the other partners, and therefore we are living in a domestic European policy.
Does this apply in the case of Bulgaria as well, in your view?
Absolutely. I think it matters for all the member states of the European Union, not only for Hungary. If there is an infringement of rules in Hungary or in Bulgaria or in Romania or wherever, we must react in the same way.
We are seeing a rise, though, of sort of nationalism, if you like, nationalism, populism, and Eurosceptic parties too. After the next election, there is a risk that there will be more of these people in the Parliament. Will that affect how things are done?
For sure. If there is an increasing number of Eurosceptics or open anti-Europeans, fascists in the European Parliament, even more than today, that will be a risk for the European Union and for the stability. Therefore, I think the European election campaign is very decisive. If the pro-European or democratic forces in Europe allow to the Eurosceptics that it is an election campaign about yes or no to Europe, then we are lost. What we must achieve is that the democratic forces in Europe, center-left, center-right, compete with their programs and personalities for the succession of Mr. Barroso. The next president of the Commission will be appointed by the European Parliament. And then we need a real election campaign between candidates. And if in national election campaigns, national parties support international candidates, it will draw the attention to the competition about that and away from this simplification of yes or no to Europe.
You mentioned who will replace Mr. Barroso. Are you still a candidate?
No, it's an honor for me to be mentioned as a potential candidate, but it's for sure too early to decide. My party, the Social Democrats, will decide at the end of the year, and the European People's Party, I was told, will organize a congress in Dublin in March next year to appoint a candidate. So it's too early today to discuss.
Okay, Martin Schulz, thank you very much indeed. That's all we've got time for. Thank you for taking part and for being my guest in last appearance on the programme. Thank you.
It was my honour for me. Thank you very much, Jim. And take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, hello.
Thank you very much for coming. Okay, you're watching 7 Days in Europe. Reading some newspapers, you'll be excused for thinking that the euro's on its last legs and soon to be abandoned. That may be the wish of some euro sceptics, but it's not actually true. Now Latvia will become the single currency's 18th member next January. With this in mind, let me welcome my second guest today, former Finance Minister of Latvia, Roberts Zīle, now an MEP who sits with the ECR group. But before we start talking currencies, we have our usual yes-no sequence, in which I pose 1 minute of questions, which I'd like you to answer only yes or no.
Yeah, hello.
Are you happy about Latvia joining the euro?
Yes.
Finance Minister Andris Vilks says that the hard times will last for several more years. Is he right?
Yeah, he's right.
Why do you think, well, only 1 in 3 Latvians are actually in support of the going over to the euro. Is that going to change?
Well, it's perhaps will change, but I think it will be pretty skeptical before 1st of January next year.
The Lats is seen as a symbol of independence from Russia. Is it important as a symbolic thing?
No, we have a more important symbols like flag and national, well, atom and something like that.
Yeah, Mr. Vilks says that there will be national symbols, of course, on the obverse of coins, like Milda, the Latvian folk maid, on 1 and 2 euro coins. So that should keep some people happy.
Well, it's a figure of the woman which is on our most important statute. It's a statute for freedom and fatherland.
Yeah, we've got to stick to yes or no for the remaining ones. Latvia recovered very quickly from the 2008 bailout. Are there lessons there for others?
Yes and no.
Okay, there are many more questions we could have got through there, but thank you very much indeed for that. We're just before we go on to a report on the adoption of the euro in Latvia, just a question to ask you first. In the polls, only 35% of Latvians say they are in favour of joining the euro. Do you feel that matters, or is it right for Latvia to join the euro in that case?
Well, yes, it's right, because we experienced a very deep crisis in late 2008 and 2009, and we decided not to devalue currency. And if we decided not to devalue currency, the only aim was to introduce euro as soon as possible, technically, when we fulfill Maastricht criteria, and that was the year 2013. And that's why if the doors are open after so difficult years, just not to go in, it would be mistaken. The other things why public opinion is so bad about euro, if you will look in media nowadays, everywhere would be pretty skeptical opinion, except those countries who are already in euro. If you will look public opinions in Portugal, for example, or Finland on the opposite side, well, you see about 70% of support.
Of course, Latvia has been through a very tough time. It had a bailout in 2008. The government applied very strict austerity measures. Do you feel that the same sort of actions would work in, say, Greece, Portugal, Spain, Ireland, and so on?
No, I think no, because it's a size of economy, also size of... Latvia was successful because it was opportunities to make export. We were coming back to the growth of economy on the base of export mainly. But we have to understand that Latvia is a 2 million economy, 2 million people economy. And also we had the pretty good advantages also with some export size. With Greece, I think it's a bit different case in Portugal as well. They are bigger countries and, well, some other... Well, it's really purely economic discussions, but I think, it's Latvian case, it fits perhaps for small countries.
I think it is, just briefly, before we move on to our next piece, it is sometimes forgotten, I think, in the media too, that the economic problems besetting the countries that have got the deepest troubles are not identical. They have slightly different roots.
Yeah. Yeah, and our roots, for example, are more close to Irish or Spanish, with a real estate boom before. That was no higher public debts. That was a pretty big private debt because of the mortgage market developed too quickly and so on. That's why we are in a different situations, let's say, like Greece or Portugal or some other countries which are almost in a crisis.
Okay, well, there'll be much more to say on that, but first, let's have a look at this report from Gundas Reiders in Riga.
Ločmeļa ģimene pārvācās uz dzīvi Vecpiebalgā pirms 5 gadiem. Tā ir neliela apdzīvota vieta 130 km no galvaspilsētas. Skaista daba, zaļa un veselīga vide, taču slikti ceļi. Kādā bedrē 10-gadīgā Loreta reiz nokrita no autobusa sēdekļa un sasita alkoni. Viņa uzrakstīja vēstuli premjerministram. Ar to viss nebeidzās. Vecpiebalgas iedzīvotāji devās uz galvaspilsētu Rīgu un sarīkoja protesta akciju pie ministru kabineta ēkas, prasot ceļu saremontēt.
Vecpiebalgas ceļam būt, un nevis kaut kad, bet jau šogad.
Pēc protestiem valdība apsolīja nu jau bēdīgi slaveno ceļu P30 renovēt 2014. gadā. Tajā pašā gadā Latvija grasās pievienoties Eirozonai. Lorets tēvs, viens no protesta akcijas organizatoriem, uzskata, ka nesakārtotā infrastruktūra ir arī striktās fiskālās politikas sekas, ko Latvijas valdība ievēro eiro dēļ. Šobrīd aptuveni puse visu Latvijas autoceļu ir sliktā stāvoklī. Ministru prezidents uzskata pretēji, ka finanšu stabilitāte ir pašu interesēs un atgādina, ka valdība pēdējos gados budžeta deficītu ir ievērojami samazinājusi.
As a result, our interest payments are going down, interest rates we are paying for public debt are going down, and in fact we are saving money and able to allocate more money to infrastructure needs, to social needs and so on.
Šobrīd Latvijas valdībai par savu politiku jāpārliecina ne tikai Vecpiebalgas ceļa aizstāvji, jo projām lielākā daļa Latvijas iedzīvotāju neatbalsta eiro ieviešanu.
That's not a surprise. It means giving up the national currency. Introducing something that's uncertain. There is a past psychological trauma from currency or monetary changes in Latvia. There has been very bad experience 20 years ago.
Optimistiskāk noskaņot ir Latvijas uzņēmēji. Latvijas lielākie eksportētāji faktiski jau šobrīd darbojas Eirozonā, stāsta Latvijas finieru īpašnieks.
Lielākā daļa mūs ieņem apmēram 2/3 ir eiro, un arī ļoti daudzi pat mūsu piegādātāji, kas nebūtu nav Eirozonā, grib šo eiro, jo viņiem ir jānorēķinās par kreditiem un savas saistības. Kaut arī, piemēram, Latvian mēs arī maksājam relatīvi eiro.
So Latvia has done extremely well. According to the ECB, the budget deficit is now 1.2% of GDP, well below the 3% ceiling. Inflation last year was 1.3%, below the 2.7% maximum by far, one of the best in Europe, in fact. And the national public debt, 40.7% against a limit of 60%. How hard was it to get to where you are now from where you were in 2008?
Well, it was very hard, yeah, obviously. But of course, for example, with the government gross debt, we had a level before 10%. Now it's a big difference, but that means public debt, of course, increased during the crisis. At the same time, if we decide not to devalue the currency in 2008, it was no reason to do it later. That's why I think austerity was were more difficult with internal devaluations than it would be with real devaluation. But of course, internal devaluation, it means you have to reduce salaries for public employees or for pensioners even in real terms. It's very difficult politically.
I mean, a lot of people outside of the Eurozone, particularly within the EU, I'm thinking of the UK and in Denmark too, people look at the euro and think, oh, it's on the point of collapse. You know, we wouldn't want to be part of that, and yet Latvia wants to be in.
But anyway, our currency was very pegged to since 2005 with the euro. That means actually in 2008 we were running out of the cash in the national bank. There was no more lots. Of course, you can print it, but it will be not covered with the foreign reserves. And the same was with the state treasury, and that's why we are so linked our national currency with euro. We cannot survive with a stable Latvian currency if this euro collapse. If it collapse or something similar, it will collapse also. We will have difficulties with national currency as well.
That's probably true of most of the EU, actually.
Yeah.
I know you've also been transport minister. One of the things that's been a problem for the Baltic states, I know, is that the transport links to the main centres of the EU, to Berlin, Brussels, Paris, are not as great as, for instance, the links to Moscow.
Yeah, it's exactly. That's as I'm fighting for many years. In a case of energy, gas supply particularly, and transport links like a railway, we are still very integrated in the former Soviet Union with Russia, and it's a very geopolitical issue. You cannot get a train. Technically you can get, but you have to, from Berlin, you have to change it about 8-9 times, and you have to spend about 3 days to get to Riga today. But that's why we are looking forward very much for high-speed link Rail Baltic, which is in a high priority. Actually, this train link in the 1930s was much quicker with the steam locomotives than it is nowadays.
So, but the money isn't there for investment, is it? That's the problem with all of the transport links.
No, it's money is there. But the Connecting Europe facility is a new instrument for next 7 years. It already has this possibilities from cohesion funds. There are enough money to build this through the Connecting Europe facilities, this project. That's why it's necessary political will and a good work on implementation.
Robert Zīle, I'm afraid we've run out of time, so thank you very much indeed for taking part. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.